Warning: some of the images are graphic and viewer discretion is advised.
I would bring back waterboarding and I'd make it a hell of a lot worse.
If there is one area of study you need to have under your belt, it is to have a thorough knowledge of history. You see, when you ask your average person what was their most boring subject in school, most of the times they will tell you history. Do you know why? Because of how it was taught. You see, you're given loads of information and data, but they don't apply it to today. History has a very strange way of repeating itself, and it is often said that those who fail to learn from the past are destined to repeat its mistakes. The United States is an interesting nation that has always been a magnet for immigrants seeking safety and a better life. Its government and media are so closely tied that it shapes the way most of the nation thinks. During the Cold War, communism was presented to the civilian population as the red menace that would threaten the freedoms of the United States, and the population was led to believe that they were at war with communism, where Christians, as seen on a placard, called communism the Antichrist. After the Cold War, the US government via Hollywood prepared people's minds that Islam is now our enemy. It was cleverly packaged, and people were led to believe that a group once known as the Prophetic locusts were a danger to global civil liberties. But when you research hard enough, you actually see that Islam murders far more of her own people than those outside of her own faith. And the United States government supplies the equipment for Muslim states to kill her own. But preachers who are wrapped up in the euphoria of our time preach US foreign policy, believing that it is Bible prophecy, now calling Islam, not communism, the Antichrist.
Why am I giving you all this? Because the description of the Mahdi is exactly the description of the biblical Antichrist, the beast of Revelation 13. And you go into any kind of a study of that and you will find that all the details match up perfectly. The Bible's Antichrist is Islam's savior.
The man who has had one of the greatest influences in aligning the world with American foreign policy was Karl Rove, President George W. Bush's spin doctor. How was he able to manipulate public thinking? In a book titled Real Power by Matthew Alford, it documents how Karl Rove was able to sway the public thinking via the power of the media. On the 11th of November 2001, the Bush administration spread its post-9/11 message on foreign policy to the entertainment media when at least 40 top Hollywood executives met with Karl Rove, Bush's chief political advisor. Almost all the major studios, TV networks, and unions were represented, as well as Hollywood's overarching trade association, the Motion Picture Association of America, which has since its early days referred to itself as a little state department. Rove outlined several themes he wanted Hollywood to publicize. The US campaign in Afghanistan is a war against terrorism, not Islam. People can serve in the war effort in their communities. US troops and families should be supported. 9/11 requires a global response. This is a fight against evil, and government and Hollywood are responsible for reassuring children for their safety. So the media is the most powerful vehicle to influence public opinion, and the American public and the rest of the world was led to believe that we are in a global war on terror. But what confuses outsiders about America is that if you have enough money and the right contacts, you can do some of the most strange and bizarre things, but still rise to the highest position in the land.
You used to call me on the cell phone.
I pledge to every citizen of our land that I will be president for all Americans, and this is so important to me.
America's state-sponsored media is set for a shakeup. The U.S. Congress recently voted to abolish the Broadcasting Board of Governors and replace it with a single chief executive appointed by the president, who would ultimately be in charge of all outlets that receive federal funding.
Which would mean that the Broadcasting Board of Governors, the organization which had 9 members, including the U.S. Secretary of State, and was destined to control the state-owned media for its unbiased approach to news, will now be basically run by a single person, by a CEO appointed directly by the president. And you would think that this is a new thing with Trump coming into power, but in fact, most of these reforms have been happening under President Obama, and he still is in office. So this is something coming from there. Nonetheless, this new provision would mean that all the organizations within the BBG, which includes Radio Free Europe, Voice of America, will now have their senior officers, will now have their editors appointed by a special designated CEO appointed by the President of the United States.
The First Amendment in the U.S. Bill of Rights is the U.S. civilian population's guaranteed protection against government tyranny. You can speak freely, assemble freely, and you do not have to worry about a state religion being imposed upon you. Though these freedoms exist in other states, it is the foundation of US liberties. But it looks like there are efforts to challenge its authority. When Donald Trump met President Obama, many were or are excited that America will be great again, but others do not believe so. The Committee to Protect Journalists said that President Obama posed a major threat to press freedom. But now they are also saying that Donald Trump is a threat also, and are very concerned that America will end up like other states, and that the First Amendment will be violated. And as he has tweeted about journalists who have criticized him, and also has had meetings with others about the poor coverage they gave him, many believe that free speech is on trial with one of the most offensive politicians in the world. There are even bills trying to ban the right to protest, and if you carefully watch where the pendulum is swinging, the nation is slowly following the policy of a far older power, a system which most overlook or ignore for fear of being labelled as anti-Catholic. But it has a far more powerful influence than many would like to admit, and it will never rest until it rules. Thomas J. Reese is an American Jesuit priest and an editor at the National Catholic Reporter. In the late 1990s, he wrote and published a book titled Inside the Vatican, and the title means just what it says. Despite the importance of the papacy for the Catholic Church and its prominent role in international affairs, its internal workings are little known to, guess who? Catholics, to world leaders, or to the world at large. So Catholics and the rest of the world are not aware of the true goals of the Vatican. This is partly a result of the secretive nature of the Vatican, which sees little advantage to letting others know its internal operations. While many focused on the evangelicals during the 2016 US elections, what role did this secretive system play in Donald Trump's rise to the position of commander and chief?
For a century, there was a paranoid political fantasy that went like this. The Pope in Rome would use his hold on Catholic immigrants in America to gain control of the U.S. government.
The Catholic vote has typically been a great predictor for the general election, and if that's the case, Hillary Clinton may be in trouble with Catholics.
Washington politicians have been hostile to the church. They have been hostile to Catholics. They have been hostile to the members of Catholicism. My administration will stand side by side with the American Catholics to promote the values we all share as Christians and Americans.
You know, Cardinal Dolan and I have some things in common. For instance, we both run impressive properties on Fifth Avenue. Here she is tonight, in public, pretending not to hate Catholics.
The famous Al Smith Memorial Foundation dinner in New York is one of the central highlights during US elections. There are many who say that it is the place where you will know who will be the decisive winner to become the next president of the United States. It is presented to the public as a light-hearted charity event where some of the highest CEOs of US corporations are in attendance. But that's a cover. It is a place where the Church of Rome gets prestige in the heart of US politics. If you read the official website of the 71st Annual Alfred E. Smith Memorial Foundation dinner, it actually tells you that by 1960, the Al Smith dinner had truly reached its zenith as a ritual of American politics, in the words of Theodore H. White. All senators who want to be presidents need the Catholic vote to become commander-in-chief, and Donald Trump gained a victory at the end of the race by the Catholic vote through the swing battleground states. He was not only congratulated by Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel and Vladimir Putin of Russia, but by the Vatican also, who congratulated him for his victory, for he knew that to get that vote, he had to come in line with papal protocol.
All right, but you're still respectful of the Pope? Can we
Totally
say that?
respectful, absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll let you go have lunch
Okay,
now.
thank you very much.
Good to see you.
So how will the two kingdoms form an even tighter alliance? They will have to get the personal data of the entire inhabitants of the planet that will give them tremendous control over everyone. This will be via a method called, number 1, SIGINT, Signals Intelligence. SIGINT is intelligence derived from electronic signals and systems used by foreign targets such as communication systems, radars, and weapon systems. SIGINT provides a vital window for our nation into foreign adversary capabilities, actions, and intentions, according to the official website of the NSA. But Human Rights Watch keeps it real and tells us that the NSA is a global threat to free speech. In 1998, a film was released about the NSA called Enemy of the State that made many people paranoid at the time. While Edward Snowden is being praised for exposing the NSA, the National Security Agency, Hollywood was already telling the world what they were doing years ago. This is not secret. It is open.
So the government's been in bed with the entire telecommunications industry since the 40s. They've infected everything. They get into your bank statements, your computer files, your email, listen to your phone calls.
My wife's been saying that for years.
Every wire, every airwave.
The NSA has expanded its operations by penetrating even deeper into the secrets of people's personal lives. Rolling Stone magazine did an article on computer techies called hackers. They are young men and some women who can hack into the personal accounts of individuals, steal their personal details, and even watch them if their camera on their phone, tablet, or computer is not covered with some tape. The US government has decided to recruit them to be a part of the world of SIGINT to make surveillance even more effective. And as we are all immersed into the digital world, this gives governments even greater access into our personal lives, where we are always leaving a digital trace behind. But our personal details will also fall into the hands of another power. Google is one of the most effective surveillance systems in the world. While you're typing data, their algorithms are also collecting data on you. The head of Google met with the Pope, but everything was kept a secret according to NBC News. And this should give a picture on how the two kingdoms will be data sharing information. The head of Apple, Tim Cook, also met Pope Francis I. And like Google's Eric Schmidt, Time magazine said neither party has disclosed what was discussed. So everything is all secretive. I wonder why. The head of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, met the Pope. And if you look at him carefully, he is definitely wandering after, to use the language of the apocalypse. And the Pope was given a drone as a gift. And this is how SIGINT is forming a close alliance with the older power. But the papacy is more skillful in another area, HUMINT, human intelligence. Human intelligence is defined as any information that can be gathered from human sources. In 1997, there was an obituary on Nino Lobello. He was an American author and journalist who worked for the International Herald Tribune, who wrote a book titled The Vatican Papers, describing the Vatican's skill at HUMINT. And he said that, without doubt, the Vatican runs the world's most efficient and most elaborate spy system with agents in just about every country in the world, and certainly in every capital city, no matter how small. This has been verified by Carla Del Ponte, a woman who was educated by Catholic nuns and a former chief prosecutor of the ICTY, who accused the Vatican of shielding a war criminal, and said in London's Daily Telegraph newspaper that I think, she said, that the Catholic Church has the most advanced intelligence services. The Vatican is working with the international police organization, Interpol, where she joined since 2008. Why would she want to join Interpol? Her own newspapers gives the reason. The Vatican's security force is to join Interpol. The collaboration gives the Vatican access to a large data bank of suspects, the latest information on criminal or subversive organizations, and information on the latest anti-terrorism operational procedures. Julian Assange is the founder and editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks, a non-profit organization that publishes classified data. In the New York Times in 2010, it recorded that American diplomats often rely on the Roman Catholic Church's worldwide network of prelates for intelligence. To tighten what WikiLeaks revealed, the London Economist verified this but goes a little bit deeper when discussing papal diplomacy. Obed Ben-Hur, Israel's envoy to the Holy See, adds that its diplomatic service is just like any foreign service, with different people having different abilities, but they have an advantage. They are highly cultured, they know languages, they know history. They are very well informed. A former papal envoy to a war-torn nation tells with pride how the American embassy would send a diplomat each morning to ask him about the war zones, knowing the Pope's man would have been fully briefed by local nuns. So the two kingdoms have both SIGINT, signals intelligence, and HUMINT, human intelligence, on lockdown. But it is important to know what will happen if they form an alliance in the future and target those who dissent. Let us look at an example, for you need to know history, and if you don't, then you will never understand the issues of our time. The US news channel CNN was to be a major vehicle in targeting and demonizing a group in Europe called the Serbs. Lacking historical knowledge, they were unaware that they were following Vatican protocol, and they indoctrinated the world into that hatred, coercing the planet into a medieval inquisitorial mindset. This is the power of the media.
How can you allow United States policy to be hostage to the Serbs in this case, who had a policy and theirs was killing?
I vaše optuživanje samo Srba predstavlja svrstavanje na jednu stranu.
The Serbs are the original cause of the war.
They are the complete aggressors and wrongdoers.
Bill Clinton has a monument in Kosovo to commemorate him for bombing Yugoslavia in 1999. And this barbaric bloodbath from the skies was orchestrated by Clinton's Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, to pursue a reign of terror in that country. It is interesting to note that both Bill Clinton and Madeleine Albright are both products of the Jesuit Georgetown University's Welsh School of Foreign Service. Clinton, a student and regular lecturer, and Albright, after the bombing, now teaches foreign policy. But who masterminded this anti-Serbian hysteria that engulfed the thinking of the planet? The late Pope John Paul II, on a visit to Bosnia in 2003, as documented in the English Catholic press, asked the Serbs for forgiveness for all the evils that had been done to them by the Catholic Church, especially during the Second World War. In the early 1990s, the Vatican recognized the independence of Croatia and Slovenia in the former Yugoslavia, but that is not the only thing she did. The London Guardian documented how the Vatican secretly armed the Croatian government during the Bosnian War, and Croatian war hero Ante Gotovina was acquitted of war crimes he committed against the Serbs. This photo shows Ante Gotovina kissing the hand of the late Pope John Paul II, which is a clear show of support for the Croats during the Balkan Wars. But to make things worse, in 1998, the Pope turned a Croatian prelate into a saint, which agitated the Balkan crisis even more. The Croatian prelate was Cardinal Stepinac, the patron saint of genocide. This man oversaw the genocide of Orthodox Christian Serbs in the Balkans. And this photo shows Stepinac at the back with his dog collar standing beside Papal Nuncio to Croatia in white, Marconi, which shows that the Catholic clergy were fully supportive of the satellite Catholic state of Croatia. It is one of the best kept secrets of the Second World War, and the narrator only became aware of this quiet episode by reading these two books by the late Avram Manhattan and Edmund Paris. These were the weapons that were used to kill the Serbs during the Second World War, and neither men, women nor children were spared. They were all to be eliminated in this ethnic cleansing program. This photo shows Catholic Ustachi soldiers with the severed head of a Serbian Orthodox bishop, men who were central to the Serbian culture. The Catholic clergy were the overseers of this anti-Serbian hatred. Some of them were clergy by day, Ustachi soldiers in the night. Adolf Hitler was an ally of the head of this state, Ante Pavelic. Pavelic oversaw the brutalities and horrors against the Serbs. He was fully supported by the Pope. The English Catholic press said Pope Pius XII had granted an audience in May 1941 to Ante Pavelic, the bloodthirsty Croatian dictator, so they admitted. but anti-Pavlich secretly escaped to Argentina, avoiding facing a war crimes tribunal. How is that possible? The Guardian newspaper is clear that both the Red Cross and the Vatican supplied passports to these war criminals to help them escape war crimes. And in 2014, the Catholic Church in Croatia conducted a mass service for the war criminal Ante Pavlich. Rome is still a supporter of fascism. So the US government continued the Vatican's anti-Serbian policy in the Balkans. And when the cold-hearted bombing took place in Yugoslavia in 1999, of bridges, hospitals and TV stations, the Vatican was able to convince the world in the last decade of the 20th century that the Serbs were evil by using the persuasive power of the media.
This is CNN Breaking News.
We must act now.
A call to take out Slobodan Milosevic.
NATO began a massive air bombing campaign.
We will provide that knockout blow.
Military action.
The old gung-ho bomb. It has attacked a sovereign state.
Waves of planes are taking off.
NATO cruise missiles land in Serbia.
NATO warplanes did fire on a convoy of refugees fleeing Kosovo.
Yes, they had inadvertently killed some of the very people their bombs were intended to protect.
NATO has proved that more or less it can do what it wants, where it wants, indeed when it wants.
The evidence that has come to light has proved that NATO was a killing machine that violated international law, but not only in Yugoslavia, but also in Libya. And both the two kingdoms will be working with her.
I'm absolutely confident that President Trump will maintain American leadership in the alliance and will maintain a strong US commitment to European security. That's important for Europe, but it's also important for the United States, because strong NATO is also important for the United States, as we have seen for decades.
With the Vatican also strengthening stronger ties with NATO. If you are totally unaware of history, you'll have no clue about her next endeavour to revive something that many people believe will never happen again.
Mankind seems intent on destroying itself.
Any impulse towards independence or rebellion will be crushed.
Welcome to the Spanish Inquisition.
The Inquisition was one of the most frightening episodes of European history, where dissent was crushed. But why was it set up in the first place? The UK has some of the best critiques on this dark episode, some from inside the Church of Rome, some from outside. Some of them were even members of the British Parliament, and a 19th century Roman Catholic historian described what was the overall aim of the Inquisition. And the famous Lord Acton, when describing his own church, said, "The papacy sanctions murder. The object of the Inquisition was not to combat sin, for sin was not judged by it unless accompanied by theological error, nor even to put down error, for it punished and unseemly remarks the same as blasphemy. Only unity. This became an outward, fictitious, hypocritical unity." Now, what is very interesting is what is the overall message that Pope Francis I is telling all professed Christians. We will quote his own words.
Lui finirà bene questo miracolo dell'unità.
So he continues the Inquisition, and the University of Aberdeen in Scotland awarded an honorary doctorate in 1856 to one of its former students who elaborates on the Inquisition. And J.A. Wiley said in 1851 that these two tremendous forces, democracy and Catholicism, poise one another, and neither can reign so long as both exist. But who can tell how long the equilibrium may be destroyed? Should a balance preponderate in favour of the Catholic element? Should Popery succeed in bringing favour from the infidel and democratic camp a number of converts to enable her to crush her antagonist, the supremacy is again in her hands. So long as she maintains an attitude which is a virtual defense and justification of all her past pretensions, both in their theory and their practice, the common sense of mankind must hold that she is ready to repeat the same aggressions whenever the same occasions and opportunities shall occur. To Innocent, history is indebted for one of her most bloodiest pages. The European Crusades, and the world owes him thanks for the most infernal institution, the Inquisition. Pope Innocent III, the Prince of Darkness, was fearful of anything that threatened his authority, and he dealt with dissent by the shedding of innocent blood. This fanatical zeal was aided and abetted by Innocent's alter ego, Catholic priest Dominic, who founded the Dominican Friars. He is known as the patron saint of astronomers. He oversaw the bloodbaths of those who did not recognize the absolute authority of Mother Church, and they would burn both their books and these so-called people who they label as heretics, so there'd be no trace of them. In the 21st century, due to outside pressure, the Vatican reviewed the Inquisition, and guess what conclusion they came to, as Wiley said 2 centuries ago? They say that the Inquisition was legally justified. The Vatican on CBS News says it wasn't that bad, and guess who they blame for it? Many of the executions during the centuries spanned by the Inquisition were carried out by non-church tribunals, including witch hunts in Protestant countries. According to Agostino Bormio, a professor at Rome's Sapienza University. But CBS News tells us one of the Catholic Inquisition's main enemies. Among the targets were Waldensians, members of a pre-Reformation religious sect that was later declared heretical. The group later joined the Protestant fold. The Waldenses were mercilessly killed by the Catholic Church for hundreds of years, not sparing neither age nor gender. They would skin them alive, smash newborn babies against a wall because they believed in the absolute authority of the Bible and identified the Pope and the papacy as the Antichrist, man of sin, and the beast of Revelation. Today, the Waldenses are now being incorporated under the Inquisition's agenda of unity. Forgiveness is central to the Christian faith, but not reconciliation with the Trojan horse. They are being deceived. But this has been ongoing with other churches for a while now. In the 17th century, a Dutch version of Fox's Book of Martyrs, titled Martyr's Mirror, was published by Tilman von Bracht, a Dutch Anabaptist. The book records the brutal Inquisition the Anabaptists experienced under the Catholic Church in Holland. But the head of the Anabaptists, Johann Christoph Arnold, met with the late Pope John Paul II to, as the article says, rebuild bridges. You have to really feel sorry for these Protestants, for they are truly naive to how the papacy really feels toward her. The oldest Catholic church in the world is St. John's Lateran Church. And as you walk closer to the pillars, the pompous self-righteous character, as it is described in Revelation chapter 18 and verse 7, of this woman, are on the walls, and it says, Ecclesiam Mater, Mother Church. In Vatican II in the 1960s, a document called Lumen Gentium by Pope Paul VI said, the one true church of Christ constituted and organized in the world as a society subsists in the Catholic Church. In March 2000, the Vatican said it had apologized for its past wrongs, but that was a smokescreen. 6 months later, the Vatican said that other churches are no sisters of hers. Her true colors were being manifest. In 2007, the Vatican blasted the churches over again, saying they are not true churches and that the Catholic Church is the one true and only church. And the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, another name for the Inquisition, said the Church of Christ continues to exist fully only in the Catholic Church. Then in 2013, Pope Francis I says the same thing. Can't the churches see? A 19th century Swiss Protestant historian said, "To understand the present, we must know the past." The principle is from the Bible, where it says in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 15, "That which hath been, past tense, is now, present tense, and that which is to be, future, hath already been, past, and God requireth from all of us that which is past." So as history continues a cycle of repeating itself, we have to understand the past to make sense of the present. John Wycliffe, standing on the far left with a Bible in his hand, was a 14th century English reformer who taught his followers to think for themselves, and that only God can judge the individual conscience. The present Pope, Francis I, said religion should not be confined to personal conscience. John Huss, a 15th century Czech reformer who was inspired by John Wycliffe, was arrested, jailed, and killed for accepting the authority of the Bible above the authority of the Catholic Church. He called the Pope, like Wycliffe, the Antichrist. In 2007, the Vatican says anyone who criticizes the Pope is committing an act of terrorism. The groundwork is being laid. The man seated on the far left and the woman standing in pink are on the lookout. Why? Because it was a criminal offense to have a copy of the Bible in your possession and also do Bible study, and it can cost you jail time or even your life. We can clearly see the stealthy groundwork is being laid over again, not only in the UK, not only in the United States, but even in countries like Putin's Russia that is clamping down on Bible studies, and also in communist China. But it gets deeper. Condoleezza Rice is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and a former Secretary of State under President George W. Bush II. She was educated in Notre Dame in Catholic social teaching and political science, being one of their most famous alumni. But even out of office, she has enraged many people. Dropbox is a file hosting service where you can share and store videos and stills. What is very interesting is that Condoleezza Rice is a member of the board, as Bloomberg News tells us. And when a person who was a proponent of government surveillance is on the board of Dropbox, it is making many in social media very upset and uncomfortable. But the Inquisition was a period where there was no habeas corpus, no trial by jury, but torture. And one of the most bestial forms of torture was putting a nozzle on a person's mouth and pouring water in there that would cause excruciating pain and drowning. Today we call it waterboarding. And who gave it their full support? It was Condoleezza Rice who approved the CIA's request to use waterboarding. You would think an act like that would be condemned. But American Jesuit priest William P. Lair, president of Boston College, awarded Condoleezza Rice on her horrific war on terror tactics. And if this Jesuit can endorse the Inquisition, as they did at one time control it, she will never condemn the United States if she continues this medieval behavior.
I said, yes, I would bring back waterboarding and I'd make it a hell of a lot worse than waterboarding.
Yeah, what did you have in mind?
I had in mind going worse than waterboarding. It's enough. Hundreds by
do
thousands.
We win by being more like them?
Yes, I'm sorry. You have to do it that way. And I'm not sure everybody agrees with me. I guess a lot of people don't.
With all this information, where is it leading to? Where are we going with it? What is the aim of having all this data, and how will it save you? The rise of the two kingdoms was foretold on an island called Patmos, where a book was written, originally titled the Apocalypse, but the English translation is Revelation. It is a very misunderstood book because of how it has been presented, but it is a book full of promises. In the book of Genesis, the tree of life was taken from man. In the book of Revelation, it is once again given back to redeemed man. In the book of Genesis, the earth was cursed. In the book of Revelation, in the new earth, there will be no more curse. In the book of Genesis, man chose death. In the book of Revelation, in the earth made new, there will be no more death. So it is a book full of promises. But who is its author, and who was it specifically written for? In Revelation chapter 22 and verse 16, it reads, I, Jesus, so that's the author, have sent mine angel to testify unto you these things in the churches. That's what it was written for. I am the root and offspring of David, and the bright and morning star. In Revelation chapter 1 and verse 1, it reads, the revelation of Jesus Christ. So the first line tells you what the whole book is about, which God gave unto him to shew or show unto his servants who are in the churches, things which must shortly come to pass, and he sent and signified it by his angel unto his servant John. But how, or with what divine method, will Jesus reveal himself to his servants? Chapter 1 and verse 3 says, Blessed is he that readeth, and they that hear the words of this prophecy, and keep those things which are written therein, for the time is at hand. The word highlighted is the prophecy, and that is how Jesus will reveal himself. And if you read it, hear it, and keep it, you will, according to this verse, receive a blessing. This is also repeated in chapter 22 and verse 7. So it is a book of blessings written to prepare for the grand finale of Bible prophecy in Revelation chapter 1 and verse 7 that says, Behold, he cometh with clouds, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him, and all kindreds of the earth shall wail, so to be so frightened and scared because of him. Even so, amen. This is the same description of the second coming in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 30. But its overall message to the servants in the churches is to teach each individual to overcome sin and anything in this world that separates you from God. But in the 14th chapter, that elaborates on the workings of the two kingdoms in the 13th chapter, we are taken to the most intense period of this earth history, where there will be two groups of people living on the earth. But there will be something that clearly divides them. One group will be 100% loyal, not to a church, neither a pastor, but to Jesus Christ, and they'll be very small in number. The other group that will comprise the majority of the earth will have sworn their allegiance to the powers of this earth, but this will be the great gulf that divides them. Revelation chapter 14 and verse 1 describes a group of people who have God the Father's name written in their foreheads. And the succeeding verse describes what they went through to get to that place. Revelation chapter 14 and verse 11 describes a group who worships the image of an earthly power and receives the mark of his name. What separates these two groups is the name they both choose to have in their foreheads or in their minds. And while many prophetic expositors stress a lot on the external, the Bible is focusing on the internal. What is this name? 19th century Bible scholar James Strong, with a number of scholars, put together a concordance, the famous Strong's Concordance, with the original Aramaic, Hebrew and Greek words in the Bible and their English translation. And the English word name is a translation of the Greek word onoma, which means character. And how is a character developed? Our individual characters are developed as a result of our education. And the word education means development of character or mental powers. And each individual will choose to either have a secular, philosophical worldview or a biblical worldview. how will each individual have the Father's name or character in their foreheads? In Matthew chapter 5 and verse 5, Jesus says that the meek or humble will inherit the earth, and this is a divine qualification for eternity. In Luke chapter 9 and verse 23, Jesus again teaches us to be humble, which is a daily self-denial. This will prepare us to have the Father's name. And 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 18 tells us how we can get there. It reads that, but we all, with open face, beholding as in a glass or a mirror the glory of the Lord, now what happens? Are changed into the same image. How often? From glory to glory, even as with supernatural aid by the Spirit of the Lord. So by beholding, that is by daily prayer and Bible study, we are changed into the same image of God. How often? From glory to glory. And Revelation chapter 14 and verse 12 also identifies what will make this small company of people distinct from the rest of the world. It reads that here is the patience of the saints. Now, how do they get patience? Romans chapter 5 and verse 3 says, and not only so, but we glory in tribulations also, knowing that tribulations worketh patience. It continues in Revelation chapter 14 and verse 12 that here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. They have patience as a result of the tribulations, and they keep both the commandments of God and have faith. But in many of the churches of today, one of these divine requirements is already causing a bone of contention, and is keeping the commandments of God. Why is there an issue? It is a false teaching called antinomianism, which is one who maintains that moral law or the Ten Commandments is not binding on Christians, according to the concise Oxford Dictionary. Where did that teaching come from? According to Mosheim's Ecclesiastical History, a solid work that deals with all of the church history in Africa, Asia, and Europe, John Lawrence von Mosheim tells us that John Agricola, a native of Eisleben and a celebrated divine of the Lutheran Church, though an ostentatious and fickle man, thence took occasion in the year 1538 to teach that the law should be wholly excluded from the church and never to be taught to the people, and that the gospel alone should be taught, both in the schools and from the pulpit. Those who agreed in this with Agricola were called antinomians, or enemies of the law. But this sect also was suppressed in its very origin by the energy and influence of Luther, and Agricola, through fear of so great a man, confessed and renounced his error. So John Agricola, a German Lutheran, introduced the unscriptural heresy of antinomianism, and it was crushed from early by Martin Luther. But there are still Christians today who teach the antinomian heresy by declaring that keeping the law or the Ten Commandments is legalism, and that those who keep the law are not following Jesus Christ. This false heresy is preparing people to be deceived and disqualified from being a part of that faithful company in Revelation chapter 14 and verse 12. For the 16th century English reformer William Tyndale, though he wrestled with the fourth commandment in the law and cleverly tried to discredit it, he knew at least in principle that the law or commandments and faith go hand in hand. He said, "We have the law of God to judge what sin is and what is not. Read the 11th chapter to the Hebrews for thy consolation." That chapter is dedicated to faith. You see, the Bible teaches to keep both the Ten Commandments and faith. In 1 John chapter 5 and verse 3 it reads, "For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not grievous." And in Ephesians chapter 2 and verses 8 and 9 it reads, For by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. Many Christians have been unable to strike the balance between the two, but the argument is settled in Romans chapter 3 and verse 28 that reads, Therefore, we conclude that a man is justified by faith without the deeds of the law. So we know that we are justified by faith and saved by grace through faith. But in verse 31 it reads, Do we then make void the law through faith? God forbid. Yea, we establish the law. So the law and faith go hand in hand, and only those who keep it and the Father's name or character in their foreheads and adhere to these divine requirements will remain faithful when that final test is put upon the world. But the majority of the world, as a result of their education, will receive the mark or character of the beast. But how will that be possible? Many look at people like Donald Trump and his brash behavior and are adamant that they are nothing like him. There are journalists that call the Pope humble, but that isn't humility at all. This is pomp and self-worship. But the world will be ripe to accept this false system of worship. Let us prove and show how by looking at how the Bible has described what the spiritual condition of man both in the church and in the world will be like just prior to the second coming of the Son of Man. In 2 Timothy chapter 3 verses 1 to 5, men are described as lovers of their own selves, boasters, proud, high-minded, and have a form of godliness, a professed or fake form of Christianity, but deny the power thereof. So their overall character is pride and self-worship, and this will make them ripe to accept the mark of his name. For Revelation chapter 13 and verse 3 says that all the world wandered after the beast. Now this is the first beast. Now what is a beast according to prophetic language? Daniel chapter 7 verses 17 and 23 says, These great beasts which are four kings which shall arise out of the earth. So a beast symbolically represents a king. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. So a beast also represents a kingdom. In Revelation chapter 13 and verse 4, it reads, And they worshipped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast or king and his kingdom. And they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? So the majority of the inhabitants of the earth worship the beast or king, but also the power who gave the beast his power, the dragon. But who is the dragon who the world worships? Revelation chapter 12 and verse 9 says, And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil, and Satan or Satan or Shaitan, depending on which language you use, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. The dragon represents Satan, and an earthly power who is an embodiment of his character will seduce the world into the same character if they follow a man-made system without questioning it. Let us look how this principle manifests throughout all cultures from antiquity to this very day. The kings of Egypt were seen as gods on earth, who wore the cobra on their foreheads, the serpent. How did God describe these mortals? In Ezekiel chapter 29 and verse 3, Pharaoh is described as the great dragon who is very pompous indeed. My, mine, myself, and I are highlighted, self-worship. Nebuchadnezzar in the neighboring country, Babylon, describes himself in a similar manner in Daniel chapter 4, verses 28 and 30. And you see this same pompous self-worship character of my, and I is exactly the same as the king of Egypt. when the prophet Isaiah was describing another king of Babylon 2 centuries earlier in Isaiah chapter 14 and verse 4. God mentioned the character of the king of Babylon. For in verse 11, he is pompous, self-worship over again. But in verse 12, it shows you who he represents. It reads, "How art thou fallen from where? Heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations." How did Lucifer, whose name means light bearer, and was later changed to Satan, which means the adversary, fall from heaven? Verses 13 and 14 explains why. It is the same character that was embraced by the pharaohs and the kings of Babylon, and by most of the world in the last days. I, and my self-worship. Let us give two more examples of earthly powers who embodies Satan's character. In Lebanon, the ancient rulers of Byblos and Tyre had thrones that were just like gods. They were surrounded by winged beings. In heaven, they are called cherubims in Psalms 80 and verse 1 and 99 and verse 1. Satan knew exactly what it looked like, for he was once there because he was a cherub. And in Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 1 and 2, it described the ruling monarch of Tyre, who said, "I am a god." Is it me, or mankind just never changes after thousands of years?
I am a god.
The rapper Kanye West also says, "I am a god." And man is just drawn to the self-worship character of Satan. And the ruler of Tyrus was described as "thine heart was lifted up." But as you read a couple of verses down, it describes the invisible ruler of Tyre, its true ruler, in verse 12, Satan, as being full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. And in verses 14 and 17, Satan, the once anointed cherub, is described and fell because, like the prince of Tyrus, thine heart was lifted up. The last system on earth will have the same character. It is a successive dynasty of men who will proclaim the same principle of previous empires, but will carry it a bit more subtly and stealthily. Daniel chapter 11 and verse 36 describes his power. "And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself, and shall magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done." In the New Testament, this same system is mentioned in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 3, where it reads, "Let no man deceive you by any means. For that day," and when you read the preceding verse talking about the second coming of Christ, "shall not come except there come a falling away first, an apostasy, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition." Now Jesus first called Judas the son of perdition, for Judas outwardly professed Christ, but secretly betrayed Christ. This is the subtle character of the man of sin, the son of perdition. And in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 4 it reads, "Who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God." Who is the last power that is both a king, a political power, as in the book of Daniel, and sits in the temple of God, a religious power, in the letter to the Thessalonians? It's important that their own words declare it.
The Vatican is the last absolute monarchy in the world today. The Pope, when he is elected, is answerable to no human power. He has absolute authority over the entire Roman Catholic Church, direct authority that reaches down to individual members. He is the supreme judge, the supreme legislator, and the supreme executive.
Though Revelation chapter 13 mentions the two beasts or kingdoms, the first rising up out of the sea, the latter or second coming up out of the earth, and their final chess moves in the 14th chapter, Revelation stresses more on the older, the first kingdom, the spiritual Jezebel, who in chapters 13 and 17 has the names of blasphemy, 7 heads and 10 horns, makes war with the saints, and the whole world will eventually follow her, whose names are not in the book of life. But one of the last chapters tells us why she has a profound influence over the earth. And Revelation chapter 18 verses 2 and 3 says, "And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the kings of the earth," these are the world leaders, "have committed spiritual fornication with her. And the merchants of the earth," these are the international bankers and multinational corporations, "are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies, or have profited from doing business with her." Inside London's House of Parliament is a statue of Oliver Cromwell, the 17th century First Lord Protector of the Commonwealth of England, Scotland and Ireland. Though a controversial figure, he identified papal Rome as the Babylon of the book of Revelation. Now why is that? In ancient Babylon, they worshipped the sun god Shamash, with its 8 rays shining from the center. The biggest 8-rayed sunwheel on earth is in Vatican City, inside of a male's phallus. These 8-rayed sunwheels from ancient Babylon were sometimes depicted inside what looks like a crescent. Some say it is a female's womb. They were adopted into the Catholic Church, and today they are called a monstrance that is used in Mass, where the crescent holds the wafer. In ancient Babylon, they had prayer beads that represented repetitive prayers. And in Catholicism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and the New Age, they also continue the use of these prayer beads. The serpent was adorned at the end of the staffs of ancient Babylonian monarchs. And these serpent-headed croziers continue with the papal bishops of Rome. The pine cone was a symbol of fertility in ancient Babylon, adopted by the Greco-Roman cultures on their staff. The Pope also has a pine cone on his staff. The Pope wears a mitre with the distinct tassels at the end that goes down to his back. In the British Museum, this Assyro-Babylonian king also has the tassels at the end of his mitre, where the papacy adopted it from. The papacy has the oldest diplomatic corps on earth, and without question the most ancient and most experienced State Department in existence. And the kings of the earth from every geography on the planet pays homage to the oldest man-made institution on earth, no matter what their color, gender, or belief system. One of these meetings was very controversial. It was with the head of Argentina. His government gave the Pope a gift, but the Pope refused it. Why? Because it contained the number of 666. Why would the Pope have an issue with 666? It's only a number. According to Time magazine, the Catholic leader wasn't happy that the sum contained the number of the beast. I wonder why. The Vatican Bank is highly connected to most of the banks or the merchants of the earth in the world. And this liaison started with the Lateran Treaty in 1929. They have dealings with the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, twin institutions that are keeping many nations in permanent debt. Barclays Bank, the Bank of Italy. But because it is so corrupt, JP Morgan has closed its account. It works with the mafia, and this has got it into a lot of trouble, where the London Guardian records that the mafia, Freemasons and the Vatican are implicated in a tale of drug trafficking, money laundering, and torturous financing spanning the world. And those who have wanted to expose her are dealt with. Do you know why? Because they are highly connected to the Vatican's CEO. Only those who patiently study prophecy can clearly see the role of the papacy, but most of the world can't, for they are drinking the wine of Babylon, her false teachings that intoxicates her spiritual senses. And this intoxication will give the two kingdoms a great advantage of completing their final plans.
To lead in shaping a new world order for the 21st century in a way consistent with American interest and the common interest.
The dynasty of successive popes who govern the papacy, though they may differ in their country of origin, their policy remains exactly the same. And in the 21st century, each pope has been pushing for a new world order. The present pope calls for a new economic order, which is a continuation of his predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI, who also pushed for a new world order, who continued what his predecessor pushed for. But what exactly is it? The best book that documents what it is The Keys of This Blood by the late Malachi Martin, published in 1990, which is over 700 pages. But to simplify it, Henry Kissinger, a man who has not only shaped American foreign policy, but who is familiar or close to the Vatican, being the political advisor to Pope Benedict XVI, gives the best description of it in his 2014 book, World Order. This book gives you at least a basic understanding of what is the new world order. The contemporary quest for world order will require a coherent strategy to establish a concept of order within the various regions and so relate these regional orders to one another. No truly global world order has ever existed. What passes for order in our time was devised in Western Europe nearly 4 centuries ago, a peace conference in the German region of Westphalia. The Westphalia Peace relied on a system of independent states refraining from interference in each other's domestic affairs and checking each other's ambitions through a general equilibrium of power. Each would acknowledge the domestic structures and religious vocations of its fellow states as realities and refrain from challenging their existence. The men in this painting in the front hold their 2 fingers in an oath round a table. The Westphalia Peace Conference in Germany was signed by different states in Europe to protect each one of them from interfering with each other's internal affairs. It was signed as a result of the very bloody and deadly 30 Years' War in Central Europe between 1618 and 1648, known as one of the most longest and destructive conflicts in European history between Catholics and Lutherans. It was provoked at the University of Ingolstadt in Bavaria, Germany, where Jesuit teachers taught Catholic Habsburg monarchs the art of Jesuit warfare on how to crush Lutheranism in Europe to protect Catholicism by any means necessary. This is documented in The Power and Secret of the Jesuits, published in 1930 by a Jesuit apologist, René Fuller-Müller, who was an Austrian cultural historian, writer, journalist, and editor. But Henry Kissinger, in his book World Order, shows what has always hindered the Catholic Church from ever having a world order, something that has hindered her thirst for world domination. He said that religious unity had fractured with the survival and spread of Protestantism. The Protestant Reformation destroyed the concept of a world order sustained by the 2 swords of papacy and empire. Please take a screenshot of this quote. Whether you have been negatively or positively impacted by European colonialism, you need to have a knowledge of European history in order to understand the most intense issues of our time. And the best authority on Reformation history, who gives it a spiritual and intellectual depth, is James Aitken Wiley. And this is what he says, "It is true, no doubt, that Protestantism, strictly viewed, is a principle. It is not a policy. It dates from the protests which the Lutheran princes gave in the Diet of Spires in 1529. They replaced the authority of the infallibility with the authority of the Word of God. It is a creative power. It is not an empire having its fleets and armies, not even a church with its hierarchies and synods and edicts. It is simply a principle. It penetrates into the heart and renews the individual. In a word, Protestantism is revived Christianity." The fundamental principle of the Reformation gave us a free state. The Reformation came preaching the true jus divinum when it taught the right of society to govern itself according to those eternal principles of justice, equity, and order which God has graven on the national conscience. It taught that all power is by delegation from God, that law ought to be the expression of the popular will, and that this will ought to be enlightened and controlled by reason and by the principles of revelation. The accomplishment of Reformation was in 1380. In that year, Wycliffe published his translation of the Bible. Today, we are very spoilt for choice with our mobile cell phones, one simple device, where we can do so many things at one time was only available via a multitude of ways. We can download apps with a variety of things to choose from. We can go to public libraries to acquire data on different areas of study. We can even print our own books and our own material. But there was a time none of these things were ever possible. Oxford professor John Wycliffe translated the Bible from Latin to English in the 1300s, using just pen and ink. The printing press was not available until the following century. He trained young men to go throughout the British Isles to teach an illiterate population on how to read at a time when there was no public libraries. His motto in the front of his Bible was embraced by the Republican democracy of the United States of America, where he said that the Bible should be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. These are Wycliffe words, not Abraham Lincoln's. Many of his followers in the following 2 centuries died to share these liberties. But it didn't just stop in England. The narrator studied media for 5 years, and what was taught at the university is now coming to light, that it was the Reformation that gave us our modern day media that broke the restraints of papal supremacy. In London's Victoria and Albert Museum, there is a section known as the Medieval and Renaissance Room, and there is a picture of the Augustinian monk turned reformer Martin Luther. There is also a copy of his Bible translated in German. The 7-headed or serpent dragon was once worshipped in the ancient world, and that was how Martin Luther depicted the Catholic Church in the woodcuts in his Bible, according to Revelation chapter 13. He is famous for nailing the 95 Theses on the door of Wittenberg, and he had to go on trial to defend his position. When the Pope challenged Luther on his views, Luther burned his works as a show of defiance and called not Islam or the Mahdi, but the Pope, the Antichrist of the epistles of John. When the Jesuit order was created in 1534 and sanctioned in 1540, it was to counteract the Protestant Reformation, especially Lutheranism. And today, the Jesuit Pope Francis I is signing away that old beef, and the Lutherans and the majority of the mainstream denominations are also coming in line with the Papal Inquisition's policy of unity. But who is going to stand? For today's generation is being given a distorted view of the past, with revisionists given a Catholic view of history. And in both the United States and the UK, a generation of children are being hindered from studying history and blurring their understanding of the past, so they can't understand what is going on in the present. This is the plan according to the British newspaper The Daily Mail. The Battle of Hastings, when William conquered England for the Pope. Henry VIII, who separated England from the Pope. Elizabeth I, who defeated the Catholic Spanish Armada, and the Magna Carta are among studies which will no longer be compulsory in a revised curriculum to be sent to schools. They could learn how Henry VIII was dressed, but nothing about the Reformation. The words highlighted in red are the Magna Carta, and this is central to understanding the issues of the global war on terror, for it is this English law of 1215 AD that led to the Habeas Corpus Act of 1679 AD in England, that today many governments, including the one in the Philippines in Asia, are now threatening to suspend it.
But if you force my hand into it, I will declare the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus. Not martial law. Wala akong balak sa politika.
J.A. Wiley tells us that so early as the days of King John in Magna Carta, afterwards confirmed in the reign of Charles II in the famous habeas corpus, and held by all statesmen who have flourished since, to be one of the main foundations of British liberty, namely the inviolability of the subject save by the authority of law. King John, King of England, was known as a tyrannical monarch, but he sealed the Magna Carta in 1215 AD through pressure of the English barons. But during the reign of the Stuart monarch Charles II, it was officially codified into British law and protects civilians from tyranny. The phrase habeas corpus is Latin that means you must have the body. It is a writ requiring a person to be brought before a judge or into a court, especially to investigate the lawfulness of his restraint. The Encyclopedia Britannica tells us that the modern law of habeas corpus is closely associated with the constitutional struggles of 17th century England. But these struggles were to extend and boil over wherever the English settled outside of their shores. And though there are monuments and statues of President Abraham Lincoln all over the United States of America as one of their great heroes, during the United States Civil War between 1861 and 1865, the president, with full support of Thaddeus Stevens, a Baptist, lawyer, abolitionist, and a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, suspended the habeas corpus in 1863, giving no one an opportunity to trial by a jury who rebelled against the Union, where they could be imprisoned in any fort, camp, arsenal, military prison, or other place of confinement by any military authority or by the sentence of any court-martial or military commission. One man challenged the right to not use military tribunals in the middle of a war. His name was Lambton P. Milligan, and luckily enough, he won the case, for he saw it as an injustice. But 2 centuries later, military tribunals are again becoming an issue in the United States, where jailing people without a jury trial is becoming a hot debated issue. And many who can look at the wider picture can see that the global war on terror seems to be robbing their individual freedoms each day, rather than a war against fundamentalist Islam. And in England, the home of habeas corpus, there is also a struggle to preserve trial by jury within habeas corpus, to protect the civilians from the Inquisition. And many are seeing that all over the world, the war on terror has given governments more power, and human rights abuses are on the increase in the post-9/11 world. It was Pope Innocent III who first condemned the Magna Carta of 1215 AD, as it posed a threat to his authority when he issued a bull on the 24th of August 1215 AD, declaring the Magna Carta null and void. The English barons couldn't care less. Catholic or not, they would not be subject to a foreign ruler, and put human rights and freedoms above the authority of the papacy. Wiley tells us that Magna Carta was constitutional liberty standing before the face of papal absolutism and throwing down the gauge of battle to it. On the 15th of June 1215, John signed the Magna Carta at Runnymede. This was in effect to tell Innocent that he revoked his vow of vassalage, or he will not be a slave to a pope, and took back the kingdom, which he had laid bare at his feet. So the beautiful principles of justice and liberty, when you cherish them, you will fight for it. But many of the principles and cherished freedoms of the Magna Carta can be traced right back to the Bible. In Deuteronomy chapter 19 and verse 15, it reads that one witness shall not rise up against a man for any iniquity or for any sin, in any sin that he sinneth. At the mouth of 2 witnesses or at the mouth of 3 witnesses shall the matter be established. This same balanced principle is repeated by Jesus in Matthew chapter 18 and verse 16, where the Lord says, "But if he will not hear thee, then take with thee 1 or 2 more, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established." In section 38 of the Magna Carta, this biblical principle is included, where it says that, in future, no official shall place a man on trial upon his own unsupported statement without producing credible witnesses to the truth of it. This is continued in section 39, where it says no free man shall be seized or imprisoned or stripped of his rights or possessions, or outlawed or exiled, or deprived of his standing in any other way, nor will we proceed with force against him, or send others to do so, except by the lawful judgment of his equals, or by the law of the land. England has a number of monuments that are central to this human right that is slowly being violated in the global war on terror. And in Bury St. Edmunds, it actually has the plaques with the location of the development of the Magna Carta, with also the names of the 25 barons who vowed to uphold liberty in their land at the remains of this monastery that was razed to the ground by King Henry VIII. It was the English Attorney General and Lord Chief Justice, Sir Edward Coke, who at the age of 76 reintroduced the Magna Carta into English law, even though he was known as a bit of a bully. It has helped to shape modern freedoms, but the English have struggled to uphold it among the lands and races she has colonized. Lord Mansfield, Chief Justice of the King's Bench, granted freedom to James Somerset, an enslaved African who stepped off a ship in London and demanded his freedom while on English soil. You see, England was the leading slave nation in the world, and habeas corpus was non-existent in the colonies for an African slave. But English abolitionist Granville Sharp fought for the blacks who were living on English soil, whose slave masters wanted to take them back to the Caribbean, and they had the privilege of habeas corpus and were free men with the help of Granville Sharp fighting in their corner. Many today have seen how the Magna Carta benefit people greatly when fighting for freedoms and human rights. In this country, talking about England, the Magna Carta led directly to the first Bill of Rights in history, which Britain passed in 1689, and which codified the civil and political rights of all men, not just to lords and barons. It granted freedom from taxation by royal prerogative, freedom to petition the monarch, freedom to elect members of parliament without interference, freedom of speech and of parliamentary privilege, freedom from cruel and unusual punishments, and freedom from fine and forfeiture without trial. It ingrained a strong tradition of civil liberties in Britain, so much so that it was never considered necessary to have a formal written constitution. It would also form the basis of the US Constitution in 1797, and 2 years later the Declaration of the Rights of Man, issued at the start of the French Revolution. This monument in Runnymede, England was actually given as a gift by the American Bar Association, for the United States was built upon the Magna Carta. It should be rightly called the United States of Magna Carta, for its entire constitution was built upon it. In this church in London, England, by the Old Bailey, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, are the buried remains of Captain John Smith, the Governor of Virginia and Admiral of New England in the United States. When he arrived in the Americas, he brought with him the principles of the Magna Carta that laid the foundation of US liberties. And though it has always been a struggle to uphold it, the state of Virginia are indebted to the Magna Carta, for it admits that out of these roots have sprung great liberties of man, great principles of law. And this has been the foundation of the Bill of Rights, where the 6th Amendment is modelled after Section 38 and Section 39 of the Magna Carta, that can also be traced to the Bible, a fair trial. But places like Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, where men are incarcerated without due trial, is a model of what the future is going to look like. A revival of Pope Innocent III's papal bull, and successive US administrations have been pushing for that Bill of Rights to be repealed, especially the 1st and 6th Amendment. When the Oklahoma City bomb killed innocent people in 1995, this domestic terrorism created a reaction from the Clinton administration, and Joe Biden tried to make some drastic measures, who was then in the Clinton administration, by passing a terror bill that would violate human rights called the Omnibus Counterterrorism Act of 1995. The Center for National Security Studies called it draconian, and they listed a number of points where it violated the US Constitution and would unfairly label innocent US citizens as domestic terrorists. It did not go through. But 6 years later, in 2001, another terrorist attack hit the United States, and with the euphoria and shock of it, what was to follow did not lead to any debate. Attorney General John Ashcroft in the Bush administration is usually credited for compiling the USA Patriot Act of 2001, but it was actually his assistant, Roman Catholic General Viet Din, who wrote the Patriot Act, which was an elaboration of Catholic Joe Biden's Omnibus Counterterrorism Act of 1995. President George W. Bush II signed it in October 2001, and his successor, President Obama, signed its extension in 2011. So successive administrations continue the same policy, and House of Representatives 1540 gives us a picture of how the United States will violate the Magna Carta and revive the Inquisition. In Section 1021A, it shows that all power is centered in the President to use necessary force to detain persons. Under the same section under number 1, detention under the law of war without trial until the end of the hostilities authorized by the authorization for use of military force. Number 4 says, transfer to the custody or control of the person's country of origin any other foreign country or any other foreign entity. And in section 1031.1 it reads, a global update on activity within each geographic combatant command. These command centers are the whole world, where via SIGINT and HUMINT, the United States will have a knowledge of every region of the globe. More evidence is emerging that the two kingdoms are going to form an even tighter bond. But we will cite one more example of what the First Kingdom, the papacy, is capable of doing if she has complete control of a state, and what you see in a micro model if she gets the opportunity she will do on a macro level. The silverback gorilla is found in the mountains of the Congo, but also in the mountains of Rwanda. Not an animal you really want to have a run-in with. A film was released about a woman who was studying the mountain gorillas and wanted to save them from poaching. It was during the reign of Rwandan President Juvenal Habyarimana that this was taking place. But his plane was shot out of the air, and research had to stop, for a deep-rooted antagonism had been provoked.
Hotel Rwanda.
They're killing everyone. It's a massacre.
The United Nations are here now. We're here as peacekeepers, not as peacemakers.
The 1994 genocide in Rwanda, like the genocide in Croatia in the Second World War, is one of those very dark episodes of human history. But the public is still very ignorant of the root cause of that deadly conflict, and the true story is kept in the shadows and has never really been told. In 2014, 20 years after the genocide, a woman whose baby was hacked to death, and was also hacked and left for dead by her former classmate, reconciled with him in a culture that is trying to heal old wounds. They don't look much different, but the man on the left is a Hutu and the woman on the right is a Tutsi. The New York Times did a photographic issue on the two tribes in Rwanda who are focusing on forgiveness. Forgiving someone who has just annihilated and wiped out your whole entire family is no joke. That takes a lot of strength and obedience to that heavenly instruction from Jesus Christ. But many believe that as Christians, they have to forgive. This child covers its face from the stench of dead bodies from the aftermath of the genocide, where everywhere you just see corpses. And other children must be deeply scarred when they witness the carnage of dead bodies for a crime committed by people who were once your next door neighbor. A collage of photos are a reminder of the people who were mostly hacked to death by machetes of a nation whose indigenous population just turned on each other. For they are the closest reminder of the skeletal remains that are on display to remind the world of this dark chapter of modern times. But what are the overlooked eras that led to this conflict? Let us observe them. The World Bank, an international financial institution, which is a part of the United Nations system, played a role in the direction of the nation's economy when it gave that nation's loans in 1974 that Hutus used to reduce the Tutsi herds and grazing areas. And the Rwanda president, in a declassified US document in 1993, feared that the World Bank was going to drop Rwanda off the list of its special program for Africa. Both tin and coffee were Rwanda's highest export commodities. Coffee, after oil, was the second most traded commodity in the world. But when the world coffee prices collapsed in the late 1980s, that led to a sudden drop in income for small farmers who the Rwanda regime depended upon. With reduced foreign aid and no exported goods, the arms company exploited the frustration of the fractured regime and the civilian population. And the Rwanda army grew from 5,000 to 40,000 from October 1990 to mid-1992. The Western powers such as the United States and former colonial powers of Rwanda, both England and France, all played a role in that conflict for self-interest. The French embassy in London, England flies a French and EU flag from its balcony. But in its doorway between the pillars, there is a plaque that shows the 100-year Franco-British alliance, the Entente Cordiale. For France is the country that supplied the machetes to the Hutu and recognized its role in the conflict. And many Rwandans also accuse her of being directly responsible for the conflict. Britain is always a silent player in the world conflicts. Her stealth in conflicts is deadly. But her distant cousin over the Atlantic, the United States, also had a role to play and knew that something was eventually going to kick off. For declassified documents from the US government shows that they knew that it was only a matter of time that a time bomb was going to explode in that Bantu-speaking nation, and with deadly attacks from the Tutsi-led Rwanda Patriotic Front, the FPR. Though they tried to make peace via the Erosion Accords between 1992 and 1993, between Tutsi rebels and the Hutu regime, with an already impoverished nation, it would only take one spark to create pandemonium. The United Nations was set up after the Second World War to prevent another global bloodbath from engulfing the planet. They are good at providing data and highlighting human rights abuses, but that's about it. Their hands are dirty, for they are directly responsible for the cholera outbreak in Haiti. That is so evil. The late Boutros Ghali was an Egyptian politician and diplomat who died in February 2016. During the Rwanda genocide in 1994, he was the 6th Secretary General of the UN. His hands are also dirty. The London Guardian documented that while he was the Egyptian Minister of Foreign Affairs, he supplied arms to Rwanda in 1990 that only led to intensify the conflict in that country. Kofi Annan, who was a UN peacekeeper at the time, said he should have done more, but the London Guardian documents how UN soldiers stood there and just watched individuals being massacred to death. Even one of the top UN generals for peacekeeping in Africa, Romeo Dallaire, said on CNN nobody was interested. A film was produced on his role in the Rwanda genocide. He was one of the very few high officials who spoke out with a moral voice and confessed that the government allowed it to happen and did nothing. But being a French-Canadian Catholic, he couldn't see through the fog of who really was the root cause of this genocide and who masterminded it from the beginning. For in 1994, the New York Times documented that Tutsi rebels killed a number of the Roman Catholic clergy in Rwanda. Why would they do that? There is a reason. It was the Catholic Church who bears the guilt for the horrors of the Rwanda genocide, and more evidence are bringing this dark chapter in human history to light. And if you think the Church of Rome spares its own, well, that's what you think. For in 2010, the London Guardian recorded that tens of thousands of Catholics were hacked to death inside churches. Sometimes priests and nuns led the slaughter. Sometimes they did nothing while it progressed. The silence of the Vatican is contempt. Its failure to fully examine its central place in Rwanda genocide can only mean that it is fully aware that it will not be threatened if it buries its head in the sand. But 6 years later, in November 2016, the Catholic Church in Rwanda apologized for the role its priests and nuns played in that genocide. And this comes at a time when the nation is trying to heal the wounds from that horrific conflict. Rome apologizing is rare, and this is very interesting considering that films that have highlighted the Rwanda genocide always have shown the Catholic Church in a positive light as victims, when the nuns were the perpetrators and the media, especially Hollywood, though it may have been sincere in what it was trying to accomplish, as usual, distorts history. A French investigative journalist, Dr. Gerard Prunier, specializes in Francophone African colonies, and he has written the best documented account of the Rwanda conflict in a brilliant detailed book titled The Rwanda Crisis: History of a Genocide. Everything the narrator has already mentioned is documented in this book, and the rest of what is said is also documented in this. Let us get to the root cause of the conflict. In London's Kensington Gardens in Hyde Park is a monument in the form of an obelisk that was erected in memory of a British Indian Army officer and explorer, John Hanning Speke, who is credited for discovering the source of the River Nile in Africa for Europe. He is the root cause of the Rwanda crisis, when he created that once infamous theory called the Hamitic hypothesis. This theory was expanded upon by Sir Henry Harry Hamilton Johnston, another British explorer, and it was also embraced by Sir Samuel White Baker, another British explorer. But it was the Francophone Catholic missionaries in Rwanda, the White Fathers, who turned this quasi-religious pseudo-scientific racial fantasy into an ideology of a state in the Bantu-speaking culture of Rwanda, where postcards of Rwanda with the White Father's name printed on it in French on the bottom left showed how much they controlled that region, where the Tutsis were singled out and trained by the White Fathers into believing that they were the superior race over the Hutus in Rwanda. And it was a French White Father, Monsignor Leon Paul Classe, Vic Apostolic of the Apostolic Vicariate of Rwanda, who developed Rwanda into a Catholic state. The Hamitic hypothesis taught that anything of value that was ever found in Africa was brought there by Hamites, who these European explorers taught were a branch of the Caucasian race from Europe. And the Tutsis, who were the monarchists, were believed to be the superior race who ruled over the darker Hutus. This was never an issue prior to European explorers, and DNA studies have shown that this Rwandan model, who is a Tutsi, though there may be some differences, does not differ that much from a Hutu. The London Independent newspaper tried to figure out what is the difference between a Tutsi and a Hutu. And when you look at these early colonial photos, there is not much of a difference. This photo shows the differences between the Hutu and the Tutsi. For one on the left, Pastor Bizimungu, is more darker, and the one on the right, Paul Kagame, a Tutsi, is more lighter. This photo is of Juvenal Habyarimana, the assassinated president of Rwanda, who was a Hutu, with his Olmec cheekbones and broad face. And this is Paul Kagame, the 6'2" Tutsi, with a more slender face, thinner nose and lips and lighter skin. And when he paid a visit to President Obama, who is 6'1" in the White House, his daughter Angie Kagame overtowers them all, for the Tutsis are very tall. Not much people know about the Twa in Rwanda, but they are pygmies, and they are 1% of the population. The Rwanda culture was controlled by a monarchy, where the king was the center of the culture. And though Hutu and Tutsi intermarried and lived peaceably side by side, it was the Tutsis who were the ruling nobility. The Hutus were peasants who cultivated the soil, but the Tutsis were cattle herders, and the more cattle you had, the more wealth. The Tutsi chiefs and warriors wore the archer wrist protector made from wood and decorated with copper. And they also wore the amasunzu, a Rwanda hairstyle among men that was a symbol of prestige, power, nobility, and bravery. Interesting. Rwanda was temporarily controlled by a German presence from 1897 to 1916 under Gustav Adolf von Gotzen. And the king under this protectorate was a tall, buck-teethed Tutsi monarch, King Yuhi Musinga. And this photo shows him with a German flag in the background. As a Germanophile, he was despised by the Belgian colonialists, for they couldn't control him. And the Catholic Church couldn't wait for his downfall because he refused to be baptized a Roman Catholic. And he was overthrown by the Belgians, and they Catholicized the state from civilians to nobility, but kept all the education and privileges in the hands of the Tutsis. But a time bomb was ticking, and in time it would explode. King Musinga had a number of children from different women, but the Belgians chose Mutara III, who resembled his father, who they could manipulate and control. He was 6'9", had a stature of a Tutsi, and he seemed like a loyal servant to the Catholic Church. He dressed in both African and Western attire. He married but bore no children. But in 1959, he died in what some say are mysterious circumstances, but was survived by his wife, Queen Rosalie Chikanda. But she was to meet a fateful death in 1994, when she was singled out with her family and massacred during the genocide. What led men to brutally single out people and butcher them? It was the introduction in 1933 of a mandatory ID card system introduced by the Belgian colonial government that every Rwandan citizen was obliged to carry, which stated his or her name and their ubwoko or ethne, French for ethnicity, that deepened social divisions. And if your ethnicity said Tutsi, then you were massacred in 1994. The French journalist Gerard Prunier tells us what triggered the massacre. The Catholic Church had been in Rwanda since the very beginning of the German occupation, and when the Belgians had come, they had found the often francophone priests, mostly white fathers, expert and highly knowledgeable about the country, and thus a godsend. Hutus and Tutsis are not tribes but social groups within the same culture. The Catholic Church admired the Tutsi and helped them rule, but now admire the Hutu and helped them rule. During the 1959 revolution, Tutsi houses quickly went up into flames. The White Fathers told the revolutionaries what to do with the support of colonial troops and the blessing of an all-powerful Catholic Church. This has been seconded by Keith Harmon Snow, an investigative journalist who wrote an article on the Rwanda genocide for Russia Today, and confirmed that witnessing the global Third World independence movements of the 1950s and supported by the Belgian Catholic priests, the Hutus in Rwanda overthrew the Tutsi monarchy in the revolution of 1959 to 1960. Some people died, some people fled, some people stayed. And the next 30 years saw majority Hutu rule, with Rwanda under constant attack by elite Tutsi guerrillas. Why did the Catholic Church switch to supporting the Hutus? The French journalist tells us that in August 1959, the conservative Tutsi created the Rwandese National Union, the UNAR, which was strongly monarchist and hostile to the Belgians, and defended the idea of immediate independence. Unexpectedly, but logically within the Cold War context of the late 1950s, UNAR began to receive money and diplomatic backing from the communist countries in the UN Trusteeship Council. The result was immediately to deepen the antagonism between the Tutsi and Belgian authority. So they embraced communism, but why was the Catholic Church enraged? In order to answer that question, you will need to read Roman Catholic canon law, and this medieval mandate says in section 751, heresy is the obstinate denial or doubt after baptism of a truth which must be believed by divine and Catholic faith. Apostasy is the total repudiation of the Christian faith. Schism is the withdrawal of submission to the supreme pontiff, who is the Pope, or from communion with the members of the church subject to him. So because the Tutsi monarchy rejected Catholicism and embraced communism during the Cold War, that is why the Catholic Church now switched its allegiance and now supported the Hutus. The last Tutsi monarch to rule was Kigeli V, who died in exile in the USA in October 2016. He was the son of Musinga and brother of Mutara III, and Tutsi rule was now over, and the darker-skinned Hutus were now in control of the Republic of Rwanda, who were more westernized in their attire and in their manners. Successive Hutu presidents ruled Rwanda no differently from their Tutsi predecessors, giving their tribe all of the privileges, and the time bomb that the Catholic missionaries, the White Fathers, started in due time was going to explode. It was only a matter of time. And when the plane of Juvenal Habyarimana was blown out of the sky, the genocide kicked off. But now, a Tutsi is in power over again. The Catholic Church was fully behind the ethnic divisions in Rwanda from the beginning, even giving genocidal perpetrators asylum in their churches in France and in Italy. Even a Baptist pastor, a Pentecostal pastor, and a Seventh-day Adventist pastor and his son, Protestants, colluded in the massacre. And this genocide is a model and object lesson that in a crisis you cannot depend upon no church. And the Rwanda government is demanding an official apology from the Vatican itself for its role in the genocide. Let us summarize this study, The Two Kingdoms Prophetic Countdown, Part 1 and Part 2. Whether you like it or not, we are all drawn into the digital world via our electronic devices, where Sigint keeps a digital record of everything we do so they can understand our idiosyncrasies, our habits. The media that is comprised of Hollywood, photography, radio, newspapers and cable channels is one of the most influential and powerful mediums that shapes our worldview. They can sell you wars and train you into disliking or hating an individual or group of people you have never met, and you will never know that you are being lied to, as the Anglo-American media is still run along colonial lines. You should still read or watch the news to get information, but balance it out and compare them with other viewpoints. This generation, both young and old, is being educated and de-Christianized into believing that there is no right and that there is no wrong, which is very dangerous indeed, for it can lead to nihilistic anarchy. Many will say, just because I watch something, that does not mean I am going to kill someone or imitate the content of its narrative. But education is not something that has an instant effect overnight. If you put enough imagery of paganism in people's face, like the children of Israel of old when they entered into Canaan, it will eventually subtly break down your resistance so that things you found distasteful, abnormal, disgusting, or horrific, and had a strict moral position on it 10, 20, or 30 years ago, you are no longer offended by it when it is constantly in your face. That's the power of Pavlovian social engineering via the media that Edward Bernays instructs to mold the thinking of a nation. You need to have a thorough knowledge of history, for you cannot understand what is taking place in the present if you don't understand the issues of the past, as two of the finest 19th century historians have made it very clear. Henry Kissinger also made it very clear in his book, World Order, that it was the Protestant Reformation that has hindered the papacy's attempt of ever creating a one-world global government, and the groundwork that men like 14th century English reformer John Wycliffe and 17th century English poet John Milton laid in advocating free speech, civil and religious liberty, and that the government should not interfere in the privacy of people's lives, and the Magna Carta that many think are old, irrelevant, archaic documents and monuments scattered throughout the south of the British Isles, are now under threat and has become the central issue of our times, where governments all over the globe are looking to repeal habeas corpus, trial by jury, hammering away at a biblical principle set up by God. Man has not changed in thousands of years. He's still the same. In every culture from antiquity, he has always craved the honor, attention, praise, adoration, and worship that belongs solely to God and God only, for he wants it for himself, still foolishly claiming that he is a God. But even if we spend hours looking at the failings of world leaders, hunting for their birth certificates, we have to daily look at the corruption in our own hearts, for many of us are no different to them. And if your character is not in line with God's holy word, you don't really have a right to say anything about any of them. God's 10 Commandments law still stands, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. And even after the apostolic faith dwindled, when it revived in the 16th century Reformation of Europe, it was made clear that God's law still stands, and even when its early opponent of its heresy recanted, there are Christians who still continue this unscriptural heresy by labeling people who keep the law as legalists. To avoid embarrassment, the 17th century English Puritan and Reformer Richard Baxter said, "If papists or others call to us for the standard and rule of our religion, it is the Bible, not opinions, we must show them, rather than any confessions of churches or writings of men." If you are a Christian, make sure you make the Bible your offensive and defensive weapon, and the lifestyle you live should be your most powerful debate and the greatest sermon that anyone will ever hear, where they will see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. The book of Revelation was written to guide Christ's church through time via prophecy, not for people to spend hours debating over interpretation, nor to be drawn into politics, but to prepare them for that final hour so that no one is without excuse, where the two beasts or kingdoms and their meddling in world affairs will be identified clearly by God's people so they know what to expect. With all this data on current affairs, history, and Bible, where do we go from here? Is there a way forward? There is always a solution. In Revelation chapter 14 and verse 7, God requires that his creation comes back to a true, uncorrupted, pure worship that is due to God's name, and recognize him that he is the creator of everything that our eyes can and cannot see, and that our lifestyles reflect him, especially on how we treat each other. In Revelation chapter 14 and verse 8, to protect God's people from getting drawn into conspiracy theory, the Bible identifies the last absolute power and its spiritual and moral fall, the papacy, a religio-political power where the religious power, Catholicism, is the woman who rides on the back of the political power, the Roman Empire, or the beast, who is titled prophetically Babylon, and her fall is due to her corrupting the truths of the Holy Scripture and steering the world away from the worship of God to the worship of man. In Revelation chapter 14 and verse 9, God gives a warning to avoid to not accept a false worship to the first beast and the image set up by the second beast or kingdom. And the Bible is unequivocally clear that this warning, alongside the everlasting gospel that brings eternal life, is to go throughout the entire planet. Everyone, regardless of their age, gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, social status, or their belief system, is going to hear it. And if it is preached as the Holy Scriptures instructs, with a loud voice from a non-argumentative, humble, Christ-centered, fearless, thus saith the Lord restorative approach with an apostolic latter-rain zeal, what will be the end results? According to Revelation chapter 14 and verse 14, it says, "And I looked, and behold a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle." The grand finale of Bible prophecy is the coming of the Son of Man. But the Bible did say that there will be a negative response to this message, both outside and inside of the church, and you will be labeled as a conspiracy theorist, Bible basher, extremist, fanatic, terrorist, killjoy, and a troublemaker who is preaching hate. But that's not for you to worry about. Plant the seed, and it is now between them and God. So the question that will be asked over again: can you really trust in the Bible? That is a decision you'll have to make for yourself. But in the meantime, you can do something. Go back and research everything you have seen for yourself. Feel free to subscribe to the Even at the Doors YouTube channel, where you'll receive regular videos. And you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter by clicking on the links below. I would just like to thank all those who have sent donations that have kept this ministry afloat. And if you would like to continue to support this work, also click on the link below. If you would like to see this work spread even further, you have permission to distribute this video for non-commercial or commercial use on the condition that you do not add or take away from the content of this study. Thank you.